Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf Kuf Gimel. It's the daf for Shabbat. We want to start at the bottom of Kuf Bet Amud Bet. We had a contradiction that Abai and Rava each resolved in a different way about how we deal with different anpaliot that are mentioned. There seems to be a contradiction. Is an anpaliot a shoe or is an anpaliot not a shoe? So one of the response of Rava was we're going to distinguish between an anpaliot made of, it's a piece of cloth that covers your foot, made of leather rather than one made of non-leather materials. So, right, a piece of cloth. If it's made of cloth, it's not a shoe. If it is made of leather, it's a shoe. So now we're going to bring a bright that supports Rabba's reading. 3 lines from the bottom. Tanya kavatei derav. Chalza b'min al hanifram shechofe et rov harega. If you do chalitza with a torn shoe that covers most of your foot, or sandal hanifchat, or a sandal that's missing some of it, which is mekabel et rov harega, but it still holds the majority of your foot. Sandal shel sham v'shel siv, whether it's made of cork or made of fibers of a palm tree. Bekava kitea, a prosthetic leg. B'muk, muk is again a chalchon shel levet, right? It's a hard piece of material that covers your foot. B'smichata raglayim, this is someone who can't walk on their feet, uses their hands to walk and they drag their feet behind. Again, there's a few different interpretations what exactly it is, but it's a piece of shoe type of thing that covers the feet to protect them from when they drag along the floor, but not used for walking. But because they are still shoe-like, or anpaliya shel or, and here we're going to see this distinction that Rava mentioned about this covering of the foot made out of leather versus made out of cloth, or hacholitza min hagadol. Now we're on a different topic, but these are always the chalitza works. As long as your chalitza was done by, has to be done by someone who's of age, not a minor. Ben Ome Ben Yoshe Ben Muteh. What position does he have to be in? He could be standing, sitting, or even lying. If he's blind, chalitza takshira. All those, the chalitza works. Okay, even though they're not maybe the ideal way to do it, it's all kosher. Kosher, good chalitza. But the Braita continues. If it's a torn shoe, that doesn't cover your whole foot. Or sandal nifchat she'eino mekabel et rov haregel, or a piece is missing and it doesn't cover the majority of your foot. Ubesmichate yadayim, or this covering that goes on your hands to protect them from, right, the floor or something, or it's some sort of, sounds like gloves. Uba ampalya shel beged, or a piece of cloth that was a piece of cloth, right, the ampalya that's made out of cloth. Ve'acholitza min hakatan, or if you use a minor to do the chalitza tapsula, it doesn't work. So again, you see this distinction between the ampalya shel beged and ampalya shel or that Rava had suggested. Now we're going to just ask who's the author of this Braita. Kava kitea, this prosthetic leg, mani, according to who does it go? Rabbi Meir, it's not a kitea yotze b'kav shalom. Okay, one who's missing a leg and goes out with his prosthetic leg, that works. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi oseh. The topic here, by the way, is walking on Shabbat, because as we saw before, I think we saw this before, if you walk on Shabbat carrying something, it's forbidden. But if you wear it as part of your clothing, like a shoe, then it's a shoe, and then it's fine. Nobody says you can't walk around with shoes on. So it depends whether you can do it on Shabbat or can't do it on Shabbat, depends on whether we treat it as a shoe or not. So Rabbi Meir thinks your prosthetic leg is a shoe, basically. Functions like a shoe, and therefore it's fine to go out on Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi doesn't permit it. So now we say, so according to, now we're going to have a question. According to this, it sounds like the Braita that we just saw is according to Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says that if it's ampalya shel beged, if it's kava kitea, which was in the first part, can be used, it must be Rabbi Meir, because again, he views it as a shoe for Shabbat purposes, therefore he'll view it as a shoe for chalitza purposes. Comes the Gemara and says, but if so, no, I skipped something. But the fact that an ampalya shel beged doesn't count, that goes by the rabbis. We're assuming that Rabbi Meir, who holds a kava kitea, is considered a shoe, would also hold that anything really you put on your foot, it doesn't have to be leather. It could also be counted as a shoe. To which the Gemara answers, so then it looks like, right, how could it be that ampalya shel beged goes like Rabbanan and the other thing goes like Rabbi Meir? We have a Braita that seems to go by Rabbanan and Rabbi Meir. That doesn't make any sense. And the Rabbanan is basically Rabbi Yossi, who forbids this kava kitea, the prosthetic leg, would therefore we assume also forbid the ampalya shel beged. So Abai, we're going to have two different answers. Amar Abai, Midas Sefer Rabbanan, Reishanami Rabbanan. Even the first part is Rabbanan. So how could that be? If Rabbi Yossi doesn't think it counts as a shoe and the rabbis hold by Rabbi Yossi. So say, Aval, it must be a kavakite, a prosthetic leg, which is covered with leather. So because it has the leather, that already makes it considered like a shoe. So according to what you're saying, if it doesn't have leather covering it, it's going to be disqualified. If so, so the Gemara says if that's the case, when it says later, it doesn't work, it should say, well, it depends, right? It should have specified if it really means a kavakita is only, right? If I am beged, it talked about or is good and beged is no good. Then also by the kavakita, it should have said if it's covered with leather, it's good. And it should have been on the other list, kavakita that's not covered with leather is no good. Just like we split between the or and the beged of the ampalia. So therefore, he doesn't accept this distinction that Abaye makes, and he has his own answer. Ela amarava mideresh Rabbi Meir, seifanami Rabbi Meir. Instead of the rabbis saying it's all the rabbis, this is actually all Rabbi Meir. So now what are you left to explain? Why is ampalia shel beged no good? If Rabbi Meir accepts the kavakiteh, which isn't a shoe, why wouldn't, and isn't made of leather, why wouldn't he accept the other case? Because he says, forget the leather, non-leather issue. Hi megan, hi lo megan. It's all a matter, does it protect your foot or not? Kavakiteh protects whatever's there, right? The stump of his foot. But the ampalia shel beged doesn't protect at all. And that's why it's not considered a shoe. So it's not the material, it's how much does this object protect your foot or not? Amar amen. When you do chalitza, you have to place your foot into the ground. This is so that your shoe doesn't fall off instead of the woman supposed to take your shoe off. Right? She pulls the shoe off his foot. Now, it seems here that you have to put your foot in the ground so that if your shoe falls off, or it might look like it falls off, we want to make it clear that she pulls the shoe off his foot. Ravashi now says to him, doesn't it say ben ome ben yoshe ben muteh? Sounds like you could be lying, sitting, or right, lying down. Your foot's definitely not on the ground. What he meant to say, is even if you're lying down, your foot has to be pushed into the ground. Another thing he said, somebody whose foot is club-footed, that means his foot is upside down. So the part that's usually on top is on the bottom, which means he doesn't actually walk on his foot because the foot is the bottom part. He walks on the top part. So he can't do chalitza because he's not walking on his foot. Okay, the shoe has to be on the foot properly. To which they say, Rav Ashi now says to Amemar, he seems to have a lot of things to say to him, Amale Rav Ashi Amemar, Bahatanya, Samuchot HaRaglayim. But didn't it talk about the Samuchot HaRaglayim? Now, Samuchot HaRaglayim, what did I explain? Again, I'll just tell you that there's some different explanations, but it seems to be something that protects your foot from when you drag it on the floor. You're not actually walking on it. So you're not walking on your foot. So what's the difference if you're club-footed and walking with your foot upside down, or your feet are being dragged on the floor with these samuchot ha'raglayim? So lav dechalitz ba'ihu, doesn't it mean that if you're using shoes, these samuchot ha'raglayim protecting your feet, that you're not actually using the shoes, you can do chalitza, which would then contradict what Amemar just said. So they answered no. You misunderstood the case of samuchot ha'raglayim. It's the yayiv leila acher v'chalitz. Let's say I'm club-footed. No, I can't walk on my feet. Let's say I don't have legs. And I use these samuchot ha'raglayim on my feet to protect, right, whatever part of my legs is there. I put them on to protect them when I drag my feet on the floor. But since they're shoe-like objects, I can give them to you to do chalitza with. So I can pass them on to a man who needs to do chalitza, right? Because it's only men who do the chalitza, not the part with the shoe. It's their shoe. I give it to you, and you can use it to do chalitza with. Okay, but not that I can use it. The point is, samuchot ha'raglayim, even if I use them as samuchot ha'raglayim, if I give them to you, for you, they'll be a shoe. So for you, they work. Which is interesting to think that it won't work for me, but it'll work for you. But that's because, again, I'm not using them as a shoe. Amar Rav Ashi, l'may deka amar Amemar, la baruva chalitz v'la bar kifuf chalitz. Rav Ashi says, according to what Amemar said, baruva and bar kifuf can't do chalitza. I don't know if you'll remember them, but in Moed Katan, and Rashi reminds us, Beperak Elu Megalchin, Rashi Dibor Matchil Bar Uva Bar Kifuf, to Ichlashu Lidate to Rav Ashi, they caused Rav Ashi to get upset. and he ended up causing them to get disease or have a problem, that itapuch karayu, their feet flipped. They were saftanim, they were eulogizers. And he got upset with them. You can go look it up on Daf Kaf Ham Ben Amoy Katan. Their feet flipped over. And because of that, because of what Amemar said in the beginning of where we started with Amemar, these people can't do chalitza. Mina arkuva ulamata. We're going now back to different cases mentioned in the Mishnah. If your leg is missing from the knee down, it's okay. If it's from the knee up, it's a problem. Urimini. Now we're going to focus on the knee down being okay. This contradicts a source that we saw in the beginning of Masechet Chagiga. Rigalim, prat lebale kabin. It says 3 rigalim, which means you have to use your legs to walk. So if you can't walk because you don't have a leg, so you have a fake leg, someone who has a prosthetic leg can't, but isn't obligated to the mitzvah, is exempt from the mitzvah of going an aliyah l'rega. They could still go, but they're exempt. They don't have to. So shanehacha dichtiv me'al raglo. Why is that different from here? That seems to say prosthetic leg is not considered. And by us, it is considered because you can use your prosthetic leg and your shoe that's on it as a for chalitza. So what do they say? Dichtiv me'al raglo. It says above your foot. Here it says she takes it off from al raglo, from above his foot. That means even if you have something above your foot, you can take it off and do chalitza with it, meaning even though it's from your knee down, that's fine. To which the Gemara says, wait, if it already says me'al raglo, why can't it be above your knee then? So, right, once you're saying it's above, what's the difference? How high above? Still all considered your leg. To which the Gemara answers, me'al v'lo me'al de me'al. Split it into 3 parts. There's the foot, there's the shin, and there's the thigh. So the thigh is already above the foot. Okay, so which Rav Papa says, Shmami, now you can infer from here, Hai is devira ad aranachi. The heel bone must be on the ground. Okay, this is like a physiological question. It sounds like they're discussing. Why? If it's not considered on the ground and it's kind of considered above the foot, the heel bone rests, then instead of saying the leg is in 3 parts, the thigh, the shin, the foot, you would have the thigh, the shin, the heel, and then the foot. And then that would make the heel me'al and the shin me'al de me'al, right? So Rav Papa says it seems that it must be on the ground. If it separates, me'al, that would be already me'al, the heel. And shoka, and the calf, would be me'al de me'al, would be over, and that already wouldn't be allowed, and we see it is allowed. Rav Ashi doesn't like his proof. Rav Ashi, even if you say it separates, called the bahade kara kikara dami. Anything that's close to the foot is like part of the foot. The heel is basically considered part of the foot, even if it doesn't actually sit on the ground. Mina arkuva ulamal. Now we're going to bring a problem because this seems to indicate your legs are not considered, right? The upper part of your thighs, or the thighs in general, are not called your legs. Now we're going to prove from a lot of psukim from Tanakh that it uses the term legs when it really means thighs. Okay, or high up even on the thighs. So why would minar kuvulamala not work? If we say it all comes from me'al raglo, above his foot, it should be fine. Mativ Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana questions. The first source is from Sefer Dvarim. At the end, when it talks about the tochacha, the curses, it says v'shilyata yotzei mibein ragleha. Okay, the placenta that comes out from between her, notice, her legs. Okay, so now where does it come out from? Upper thighs. So Amar Abaye, when a woman squats to give birth, she squats down so that, right, either she's in a standing position and squats or sitting position, she squats her body almost, right, her legs move up, and then the child is born coming out through her legs, also the bottom part of her legs, because basically the bottom part of her legs be almost like they're moved further up because of the position that she's in when she gives birth. Okay, next, Tashma, this is Mephibosheth in Sefer Shmuel. Lo asar raglav v'lo asas famo, he didn't shave his pubic hairs and he didn't shave his mustache. So what does it say? Lo asar raglav is referring to his pubic hairs. So what do you see here? Lishan, right, raglav means in between the thighs. Answer, lishana ma'alya. Oh, they just didn't want to really say what it was, so they used a euphemism, as we know very often, and this is going to be the answer to the next bunch of psukim. Tashma, what about this one? Come and learn from here. Vayavo Shaul lahasech et raglav. Shaul came to go to the bathroom, right, to do his needs. And it says raglav. So, Lishana Ma'alya, again, a euphemism. Tashma, next one, Ach Mesichu Ragla B'chedra Mekera, famous story in Sefer Shoftim. Ehud is the shofet, and he goes into Eglon, who's very overweight, and he kills him. And he locks the door behind him. Nobody knows what's going on. And when they see he's not coming out for a long time, they thought that he went to the bathroom. So it says Mesichu Raglav, he was taking care of his needs. Again, it says Raglav, which would mean higher up in the body. And again, Lishana Ma'alya, it's just a euphemism. Ben Ragleha, now we get to Yael and Sisra. This is also in Sefer Shoftim, where she basically seduces him, the head of the army of the Canaanim, seduces him to have relations with her. And it says, Ben Ragleha, between her legs, Kara Nafal Shachav, he fell, he bowed, he fell, he slept. Ben Ragleha, Kara Nafal, Ba'asher Kara Sham Nafal Shadud. Okay, describes what happened, and Ben Ragleha, it says. So again, Lishana Ma'alya, it's just a euphemism. Since we're already on the topic, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Sheva Be'ilot Ba'al Oto Rasha Ba'oto Ayom. Okay, slept with her on 7 times that day. Shnei Amar, how do we know? Ben Ragleha Kara Nafal Shachav, Ben Ragleha Kara Nafal, Ba'asher Kara Sham Nafal Shadud. If you count how many times it says Kara Nafal Shachav, 7 times those words appear altogether. It must have been 7 times. Now we have a question. Didn't she enjoy herself? If they had, I assume, okay, now this is a very good question. She wasn't raped here. She initiated. And the sense is that if she initiated a sexual encounter with him, she must have enjoyed herself. Now, why they assume that is a very good question, right? You imagine she was just doing her job and wasn't really enjoying herself, maybe because he had relations with her 7 times, so they assume it must have been pleasurable for her, otherwise it wouldn't have been pleasurable for him to do it so many times. I'm not sure exactly. But for whatever reason, the Gemara assumes that she must have enjoyed it, to which they say, how could that possibly be, right? She can't enjoy an avera from doing a sin. Remember, she wasn't Jewish, right? But she was considered, right, somewhat, right? They're considering her as if she was Jewish. So now they say, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Kol Tovat. Just 1 second. I want to look at some Tosfot here for a minute. Yeah. Okay, fine. Let's see. Okay, I'm not going to bring up Tosfot, but Tosfot has a little bit of a thing about this. Wasn't she doing it to save the Jewish people? And on the other hand, she initiated it anyway. Well, and how could they say tivorach b'nashim if she did this in a way that seems inappropriate, right? That we could see them asking that question. In any rate, tivorach nashim Yael is in Shirat Torah. It was a song sung about this whole thing. Anyway, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Turning now to Amud Bet. Kol tovatan shel reshaim ra'ahi etzel tzadikim. Anything that's good for bad people is bad for good people, for tzadikim, for righteous people. How do we know this? In other words, so yeah, it might have been enjoyable for him, but it wasn't for her. Shenema, as it was said to Lavan, Hishamer lecha. Okay, the malach appears to Lavan, or God appears to Lavan and says to him, it says in the pasuk, Vayavo Elohim Lavan Arami b'chalom alayla. He comes to him in a dream and he says to him, Hishamer lecha pen tidaber im Yaakov mitov ra. Watch what you speak and don't speak to Yaakov from good or bad. So I understand why you shouldn't speak bad to Yaakov. Ela tova ma'lo, but why can't you speak good things? Ela shmamina. One can infer from here, tovatan shel rishaim ra'ahi etzel tzadikim. Okay, the things that are good for rishaim, things that they say that are good, could be bad for tzadikim. Okay, so bishlama. So now they're going to say, okay, wait, let's try to figure out what this is and does it apply in our case with Yael? So maybe he's describing something good that happened and he mentions his gods in the conversation. So that would be bad. But what could be bad here in having a sexual encounter with Sisra? It seems to be pleasurable activity. So they answered the kashade bazuama. This is even more hard to understand. If the first part was hard to understand why they assumed she enjoyed herself, what does this mean, zuhama? He put bad stuff in her body. Okay, there's a midrash that basically the Nachash seduced Chava to have relations with him. And he when he was having relations with her, he put this zuhama inside. Zuhama is usually like something impure, something bad. So Yisrael, Sha'amdu al Har Sinai, Paska Zuhamatan. But when the Jews stood at Matan Torah, when they got the Torah, the zuhama ended. It kind of fixed by part of the chet of Chava. It removed this zuhama from their bodies. And again, it's treating Yael as if she's Jewish, really, even though she's not. But the idol worshippers, their zuhama didn't end at the time of Matan Torah. So he still had it. When he slept with her, he put that into her. And that's why it made it bad for her. Okay? So it's almost avoiding the question. Could say maybe it's a pleasurable activity, but there were bad reactions in her body. Now she has this zuhama, which again, hard to really understand exactly what the zuhama is. I think we can understand from a psychological perspective, right? Think about the trauma she went through, even though it wasn't rape, right? She initiated to save the Jewish people and to get rid of this evil person. And that leaves you with something bad, right? That's with you, that you had to sacrifice your body to do something. That's not a good thing. Okay. So now, according to the Mishnah, if he uses a shoe that's not his own, it still works. Tanu Rabbanan, where do we learn this from? The Braita says, Na'alo. Okay, it says, Chatzan na'alo me'al raglo. She takes off his shoe. So it sounds like, na'alo, it sounds like only his shoe. Na'al shekol adam minayin. How do we know? It could be anyone else's shoe we can use. Talmud Lomar Na'al. We call them at the end, V'yikashma b'Yisrael. They'll call them in the Jewish people, Beit Chalutz Hanal, the person who took off the shoe. So there it doesn't say Na'alo, his own shoe. So from there we learn it could be any shoe. Im kem Talmud Lomar Na'alo. So why does it say his shoe? Na'alo hara'oilo. It's a na'al that's appropriate for him. It fits him size-wise. Meaning, prat legadol she'en yachol ha'aloch bo. It can't be a shoe that's too big that you can't walk in it. Prat lekatan she'en chofer raglo. It can't be too small that it doesn't cover the majority of his foot. Uprat l'sandal ha'mesulayim she'en lo akev. Also can't be a shoe that doesn't have a sole on it. Abaye havakai kameh de Rav Yosef. Now we're going to hear an interesting story. Not super interesting, but somewhat interesting. Abaye comes before Rav Yosef. Ata Yevamot lechlotz. Yevamot comes along, needs chalitza. Amarle. So Yosef turns to Abaye and says, Havli sandalech. Give me your shoe. Yeah, okay, give me your shoe so I can give it to the person who needs to do yibum. Ya'ivle sandala dismola. He takes off his left shoe. To which Rav Yosef looks at him and says, what are you giving me? The rabbi said you could use your left one, but you're not supposed to. Why did you take off the left one? Ideally, you should take off the right one. And why not? Just give me the right one. Amarle. So Abaye retorts back to Rav Yosef, who was his rabbi, remember. He says, Ihachi, sandal she'eno shalonami. Well, also, you're using someone else's shoe, and that's not ideal either. Right? They said you could use it, but that's only b'diavad if you have no choice. It didn't say ideally. What you're doing anyway by asking me for the shoe is less than ideal. So what's the difference if I give you the left one or the right one? You're already in the realm of non-ideal. So Amarle, Rav Yosef said, you didn't understand what I was talking about. What I was telling you is havli va'aknele. I want your shoe, and I want you to give me rights to the shoe, and I'm going to basically give rights to the shoe to this person who needs chalitza. And he's going to do chalitza, and that's what's going to happen. In other words, you're going to pass on your ownership of this shoe to him temporarily. This is what we do, for example, on the first day of Sukkot. You're supposed to own your lulav. If you don't have your own lulav, someone can give you theirs as a gift. On the condition that you'll return it, they can give you a temporary gift. So what I meant was give him the shoe so that it's his own, give him rights to it, and then it's his, and then it's ideal. And then you should have given him the right shoe because this is an ideal situation we're trying to do and not a less than ideal situation. Now we're going to have another little section. Sandal shel eitz. Said in the Mishnah, a sandal made of wood. Man Tana, who's the Tana who says this? And by the way, I should just mention, this is what we actually do in chalitza with the shoe and the acquiring rights. Nobody has a chalitza shoe. People don't own it. It's a special shoe. You can look up online and read up about chalitza shoes. You can see videos of it. Anyway, a special shoe. When you go into court, the Beit Din gives you the shoe and gives the man ownership rights to the shoe. They basically give it to him on condition that he return it, and it's his for the moment of chalitza. Sandal shel eitz, mantan. Who's the one who says a sandal shel eitz works, a wooden shoe? Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Meir, he did not. Kitei yotzeh b'kav shelo, right? The one with the prosthetic leg goes out with his prosthetic leg, which is basically his covering, his shoe. Tivur Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, Osir. So again, he calls the kava kitei a shoe. Likewise, the sandal shel eitz is like that. That's made of wood. Avod Shmuel omer, mechupeh or v'divrei hakol. He says when it says sandal shel eitz, it means it's covered with leather, and therefore it's right. It's not just by itself. It wouldn't be good, just wood. It needs to be covered with leather, and then it goes even according to Rabbi Yossi. Now we're going to have, for the end of the section of today, two statements of Rav Papi and Rav Papa, who each understood Rava differently. Okay, we're going to have two versions of what Rava said. Amar Rav Papi mishmei de Rava. Sandal hamuzgal. We're now talking about a sandal of someone of a leprous sandal. This is, you could have leprosy in your house, on your body, or on your clothes. So this is leprosy of your clothes. Sandal hamuzgal lo tachlotz bo. Okay, there's a difference between muzgar and muchlat. We've learned this before. Muzgar is when you quarantine for 7 days to see if it gets any worse. And then it could be even quarantined for 14 days. Then when it's determined to be a definite leprosy, then it's called a muchlat. So he's going to distinguish in this first reading between a muzgar and a muchlat. That's a sandal. Okay, a sandal hamuzgar lo tachlotz bo. You can't use it for chalitza, but im chatza chalitza takshera. But if you did it, it works. Sandal hamuchlat, if it's determined to for sure be leprosy, it needs to be burnt. Because it needs to be burnt, it's considered as if it has no shiur to it. This we saw in Sukkah, in Eitz Hashera, that is kitute michtat shiur. It's supposed to be burnt, so it's as if it doesn't exist. It doesn't have it's not considered an object really, because it's supposed to be burnt. So lo tachlotz bo v'im chalza chalitza psula. It doesn't even work because it's not even a sandal. Rav Papa mishmei de Rava amar, echad sandal hamuzgar, echad sandal hamuchlat, lo tachlotz bo v'im chalza chalitza takshera. He thinks both of them, it's ideal not to do it, but if you did it, it works. So now we're going to have a few questions against Rav Papi, the first opinion, who distinguished. Meitive brings a contradiction from a source. Bayit hamuzgal mitamei mitocho, muchlat mitocho umeachorav. Okay, if you have a house that's muzgal, quarantined, so if you touch it from the inside, but you don't come all the way into the house, only part of your body is in the house, not the majority, but you touch the wall on the inside, you become impure. If it's a muchlat, mitocho umeachorav. Also, if you touch the outside and also if you touch the inside, both of them are going to make you tamei. If you bring most of your body into the house, you become tamei. It says if you come into the house, now if the house is supposed to be destroyed, because that's what you do with a leprous house, then it's not considered a house if it needs to be destroyed, just like the shoe is not a shoe if it needs to be burned. So this seems to go against Rav Papi. To which the Gemara says, no, shanehatam damarkav natatza tabayit. The pasuk, it's unique here because the pasuk says you should destroy the house. It calls it a house, even though it's already been determined to be tzarad, leprous, which means since it calls it a house, it's still called a house. And that's why it still could cause you to become impure. So now they say, right, afilu b'shane titza ka'oi bayit. Even when you're destroying it, it's still called a house. So now they bring another halacha. Tashma with mitzvah. Matzlit sheyesh bo shalosh shalosh. It has 3 by 3 fingers breadths. Okay, this is like a small handkerchief, which poor people use. So it's considered to have tumah. Alpha pisha ein bo kazayit, right? It's susceptible to impurity that size. Alpha pisha ein bo kazayit, even though it's thin. Okay, you could have something this size. It's very thin and can't really hold much. Even a kazayit it can't hold. Okay, even though it can't even hold a kazayit in it, still, once you put the majority of it inside this house, it will become impure. Now, my lav muchletet, is this not a muchlat house? And why would it be impure? Because, right, is it not muchlat? Because we're assuming, why is it going to become impure? Because it's impurity like a tent. Right now, we don't really know why. Right now, we're going to just assume it's a muchlat, okay? And that causes it to become impure, to which we're going to have a problem. Because again, the cloth Now, what this means is if the cloth is leprous and it's impure, I have to be clear about this. The cloth is leprous and you bring it into the house and the majority of it goes into the house, it makes everything impure. So now they say, my lav muchletet, right? Is it not muchlat, which would then show, even though the beged, now this is not the house, this is the beged, has impurity and it's muchlat, what do you see? It's supposed to be burned and yet it still can pass on impurity. It's still considered like a cloth. And that would go against what we said about the shoe, that it's not a shoe because it needs to be destroyed. So they say, lo musgeret, you could say it's talking about a musgeret that doesn't need to be burned. To which the Gemara asks, hachi, I'm a sefer, but then it doesn't match the sefer. Meaning, from the end of the source, it's going to be very clear that we're talking about a muchlat. Why is that? Well, a muchlat, what happens is, a muchlat becomes, once it's determined to be muchlat, it has the properties like a dead body, which means if you bring it into the house, it's like a dead body. If there's a kezayit there, it's going to make everything in the house impure, just like the kezayit and olive bulk of a dead body will do the same. So let's see that inside. It says in the continuation of that source, Sayuba kama zeitin. If it was thick strings and that little piece of cloth could hold more than one zayit, kevan shenichnas mimena kezayit labayit tahol timato. As soon as one kezayit, something that could hold the kezayit, comes into the house, it already, that size already is already going to make the entire house impure. Now, only a muchlat, a leprous house, or a leprous cloth in this case, is going to cause impurity to come into the house like a dead body, because mitzorah is like me. But if it's only quarantined, it's not going to have that status. So, Eliyamar musgeret, quarantined, if you say that, it's not compared to a dead body. So, how do we answer this? Shanehatam, it's different here. Again, we're going to have the same thing with the house. It's a unique exception because it says, and you burn the cloth, the beged, the clothing, which means, again, it's still called a beged even when you're supposed to burn. That's different from this chalitza shoe. The chalitza shoe, right, we're going to say, according to this, we're going to have a start with the beged, right. So now they're going to say, so these are unique things said here where we don't have that by the shoe. So now they say the ligmar mineh, but why don't we just say for chalitza purposes? In other words, this is all for chalitza. Right? That was for tuma. Now we're going to say, why don't we learn from there to chalitza? In other words, we still consider it a cloth, even though you're going to destroy it. We still consider it a house, even though you're going to destroy it. That's both for purposes of impurity. So now they say, well, why don't we say, okay, let's say the same thing for this leprous shoe for purposes of chalitza. It's still a shoe, even though, since you haven't destroyed it yet, even though you're supposed to. So they say, isur mituma lo gamrin. These are two separate categories. One is how do things become impure? The other is, now it's not exactly isur v'heter, but the world of chalitza is an isur v'heter issue because it's permitting a woman to marry or forbidding her to marry someone else, right? Take care of chalitza. So it's two different realms, and you can't use the same definitions from one to the other. When the Torah called it a beged or called it a house, it was because it was laws of impurity. When it comes to, is this considered a shoe, though, we won't necessarily consider it a shoe to allow it for purposes of chalitza. If it was a tumah issue, we would, but it's not an impurity issue. Rava, now there was this differentiation of what this disagreement about what Rava said. Is a muchlat b'diavad okay or not okay? Now Rava himself said, Hilchata, the halacha is echad sandal muskal, echad sandal shemuchlat, echad sandal shalavudat kochavim lo tachlot v'imchatza chalitza takshera. If you have a shoe, or a sandal that was definite or quarantined, or it was used for idol worship, you can't use it for chalitza, but if you did, your chalitza will work. So here you see it goes by Rav Papa. Okay, the second interpretation. We'll see in tomorrow's class a few other things that Rava said here, some other halachot about other shoes that are permitted or not permitted, and then we'll move on to the next Mishnah. More details about how the chalitza ceremony was done. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.